Those horrible murders which I read about in the evening edition of La Gazette de Tribunal some years ago will always mark for me the most profound experience in my life. I was most fortunate to be able to spend the spring and summer of 1840 in Paris, that vast, populous city of light. And during that time, I became acquainted with one Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin, a gentleman of an excellent and indeed illustrious family. And he and those murders will always be entwined in my memory. He and I eventually came to share chambers, as I was astonished at the vast extent of his readings, and above all, I found myself enkindled with a wild fervor and the vivid freshness of his imagination. One talent Dupin had that I could not help remarking and admiring was a particular analytical ability, the exercise of which he seemed to take an eager delight. Indeed, there were many times when he gave me proof of this most remarkable ability by telling me what I was thinking before I even ventured a word. It was this quality of my friend's character that led me to show him the evening edition of La Gazette, in which the murders on the Rue Morgue were detailed, thinking it would excite his analytical interest. But to my surprise, he made no comment on the lurid details.
Extraordinary murders. This morning, at about 3 o'clock, the inhabitants of the Quartier Saint-Roch were roused from sleep by a succession of terrific shrieks, issuing forth from the 4th story of a house in the Rue Morgue, known to be in the sole occupancy of one Mademoiselle L'Espanaye and her daughter, Mademoiselle Camille L'Espanaye. Some neighbors, accompanied by 2 gendarmes, forced their way into the building, by which times the cries had ceased. But they reported hearing 2 or more rough voices in angry contention that seemed to proceed from the upper part of the house. Before the party reached the 2nd landing, these sounds also had ceased, and all was perfectly quiet. At a large back chamber in the 4th story, the door was forced open, and a horrible spectacle presented itself. The apartment was in the wildest disorder. The furniture was broken and strewn about. A bed was thrown from its bedstead into the middle of the room. On a chair lay a razor, besmeared with blood. On the hearth were 2 or 3 long tresses of gray human hair, also dabbled with blood. Upon the floor were found 4 Napoleons, an earring of topaz, 3 large silver spoons, and 2 bags containing nearly 4,000 francs in gold. The drawers of a bureau, which stood in one corner, were open and had been apparently rifled, although many articles still remained within them. A small iron safe was discovered under the bed. It was open, with the key still in the door. It contained only a few old letters and other papers of little consequence. Of Madame L'Espanaye, no traces were to be seen, but a search of the chimney revealed, horrible, horrible to relate, the corpse of the daughter, head downward, having been forced up the narrow aperture. The corpse of the old lady was found in a small paved yard in the rear of the building, her throat so entirely cut that upon an attempt to raise her, the head fell off. To this horrible mystery, there is as yet, we believe, no clue.
I'm surprised, my friend, that you take no interest in these extraordinary events.
I'm sure that the police, with their usual cunning, will soon get to the bottom of it.
The next day's papers had additional particulars, which I also shared with Dupin.
The tragedy of the Rue Morgue. Many individuals have been examined in relation to this most extraordinary and frightful affair, but nothing whatever has transpired to throw light upon it. Upon questioning, the prefect of police has informed us that many witnesses have been examined. Oh, Monsieur, what do you know? Tell us what you know.
Our investigation has produced these facts. Two ladies had lived in the house 6 years. Witnesses had seen the daughter only some 5 or 6 times. The two lived an exceedingly retired life, were reported to have money. I heard it said among the neighbors that Madame L. told fortunes. They did not believe it. Had never seen any person enter the door except the old lady and her daughter, a porter once or twice, a physician some 8 or 10 times.
Monsieur, a physician some 8 or 10 times?
Many other persons, neighbors, gave evidence to the same effect. No one was spoken of as frequenting the house. It was not known whether there were any living connections of Madame L. and her daughter.
Oh, what about the house, monsieur?
The shutters were in front of the windows, and they were seldom opened. Those in the rear were always closed, with the exception of the large back room, 4th story. The house was a good house, rather old.
Who were the witnesses, Monsieur Prefect?
We elicited much material testimony from witnesses. Pauline Dubourg, laundress.
Laundress.
I knowed both ladies for 3 years. I washed for 'em. The old lady and her daughter seemed on good terms. Quite affectionate with each other they was. It were good pay. They say the old lady put a lot of money by. Never saw nobody in the house. No servant I could see.
Pierre Moreau, tobacconist.
Tobacconist.
I have been selling small quantities of tobacco and snuff to Madame L'Espanaye for nearly 4 years. Madame and her daughter have lived in the house for more than 6 years. The house was the property of Madame L'Espanaye. She had had tenants some years ago, but became dissatisfied with the abuse of the premises and decided not to let any portion of the house anymore. The old woman was childish.
Isidore Muset, gendarme.
Gendarme.
We were called to the house about 3 in the morning. We found some 20 or 30 persons at the gateway, endeavoring to gain admittance. We forced it open at length with a bayonet. We heard shrieks until the gate was forced, and then they stopped suddenly. It seemed to be screams of some person or persons in great agony, long, drawn out, not short and quick. At the first landing, I heard 2 loud and angry voices, one a gruff voice, Frenchman, made out the words sacré and diable. The other voice was much shriller, very strange voice. Foreigner? Not sure if it was a man or a woman. Couldn't make out what was said, but I believe it was Spanish.
Henri Duval, a neighbor by trade, silversmith.
The shrill voice was Italian. I'm not acquainted with the Italian language, so could not understand the words, but could tell from the intonation. Could have been a man, could have been a woman.
Odenheimer, a restaurateur, a native of Amsterdam, not speaking French, was examined through an interpreter. The gruff voice was a Frenchman, said repeatedly sacré, diable, and once mon Dieu.
Mon Dieu.
He claimed that the shrill voice was also a Frenchman, said it sounded fearful and angry, unequal. He couldn't distinguish the words. Said the voice was harsh, not so much shrill as harsh. Wilma Bird, seamstress, was one of the party entering the house. An English woman, has lived in Paris 2 years.
The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman. I could distinctly hear sacré and mon Dieu. The shrill voice was very loud, louder than the gruff one. Could have been a woman's voice. It certainly was not an Englishman. Appeared to be that of a German. I do not understand German.
Alfonso Garcia, undertaker. resides in the Rue Morgue, is a native of Spain.
Spain.
The gruff voice was a Frenchman. The shrill voice was an Englishman. I do not understand the English language, but could tell by the intonation.
Alberto Montani, a confectioner, an Italian.
The Italian.
The gruff voice was the voice of a Frenchman. I distinguished several words. The speaker appeared to be expostulating. I could not make out the words of the shrill voice. It was quick and uneven. I think it was Russian. I have never conversed with a native of Russia.
Jules Mignon, banker of the firm Mignon et Fils, Rue de la Reine, the elder Mignon.
Le banker. Aha.
Madame L'Espanaye had some property. She opened an account with us in the spring 8 years ago. She made frequent deposits in small sums. The third day before her death, she took out in person the sum of 4,000 francs. It was in gold. We sent a clerk home with her with the money.
Adolphe Lebon, clerk to Mignon et Fils.
Le clerc.
I accompanied Madame Espanoye to her residence on the day in question, with the 4,000 francs put in 2 bags. When the door was opened, Mademoiselle appeared and took one of the bags from my hands, while the old lady relieved me of the other. I bowed and departed. I did not see any person in the street at the time. It is a by street, very lonely.
Monsieur, did anyone examine the body?
Paul Dumas, physician, was called to view the bodies about daybreak. They were both then lying on the sacking of the bedstead in the chamber where Mademoiselle L. was found.
The corpse of the young woman was much bruised and excoriated. The fact that it had been thrust up the chimney would account for these appearances. The throat was greatly chafed. There were several long scratches just below the chin, together with a series of livid spots that were evidently the impression of fingers. The face was greatly discolored, and the eyeballs protruded. The tongue had been partially bitten through. A large bruise was discovered on the pit of the stomach, produced apparently by the pressure of a knee. In my opinion, Mademoiselle L'Espanaye was throttled to death by a person or persons unknown. The corpse of the mother was horribly mutilated. All of the bones of the right leg and arm were more or less shattered. The left tibia was splintered, as were all the ribs on the left side. It is not possible to say how the injuries were inflicted. A heavy club of wood, a broad bar of iron, a chair, any heavy, obtuse weapon would have produced such results if wielded by the hands of a very powerful man. No woman could have inflicted the blows with any weapon. The head was completely separated from the body and was greatly shattered. The throat had evidently been cut with some very sharp instrument, probably with a razor.
How was this thing done? How did the murderer escape?
This we do not yet know. The door of the chamber in which was found the body of Mademoiselle L. was locked on the inside. Upon forcing the door, no person was seen, no windows. The windows of both the back and front rooms were down and firmly fastened from within. The door between the 2 rooms was closed but not locked. The door leading from the front room into the passage was locked with a key on the inside.
Did you search everywhere, monsieur?
There was not an inch of any portion of the house which was not carefully searched. Sweeps were sent up and down the chimneys. The house was a 4-story one with garrets. A trapdoor in the roof was nailed down very securely. did not appear to have been opened for years.
How long was the time between the hearing of voices in contention and the breaking of the room door?
The time was variously stated by witnesses. Some made it as short as 3 minutes, some as long as 5.
Only 3 to 5 minutes? So how did the murderer get out so quickly?
That is what we are trying to ascertain. The chimneys of all the rooms on the 4th story were too narrow to admit the passage of a human being. There's no back passage. The body of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye was so firmly wedged in the chimney that it could not be got out until 4 or 5 of the party united their strength.
But, Monsieur Prefect, what are the police doing?
The police are continuing to investigate.
A murder so mysterious and so perplexing in all its particulars was never before committed in Paris, if indeed a murder has been committed at all. The police are entirely at fault. There is not, however, the shadow of a clue apparent.
Dupin heard all of these details seemingly unmoved. It was only the mention of one name that finally caught his attention. A postscript in the evening edition of the paper stated that Adolphe Le Bon, clerk to Magnon et Fils, had been arrested and imprisoned.
I see that they have arrested Le Bon. Tell me, what do you think of these murders?
Well, I agree with all Paris in considering them an insoluble mystery. I see no means by which we can possibly trace the murderer.
We must not judge of the means by this shell of an examination. The Parisian police are extolled for their acumen, but they have cunning, but no more. There is no method to their proceedings. They make a vast parade of measures, but not unfrequently those are ill-adapted to the objects proposed. The results attained by them are not unfrequently surprising, but for the most part are brought about by simple diligence and activity. When those qualities are unavailing, their schemes fail. As for these murders, let us make some examinations for ourselves before we make up an opinion respecting them. An inquiry will afford us amusement. And besides, Le Bon once rendered me a service for which I am not ungrateful. We will go and see the premises with our own eyes. I know the prefect of police and shall have no difficulty in obtaining the necessary permissions.
The permission was obtained, and we proceeded at once to the Rue Morgue. The house was readily found, as there were still many persons gazing up at the shutters with an objectless curiosity. It was an ordinary Parisian house. Before going in, we turned and passed to the rear of the building. Dupin, meanwhile, was examining the whole neighborhood as well as the house with a minuteness of attention for detail which I could see no possible object. Retracing our steps, we entered the building and went upstairs into the chamber where the bodies of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye had been found and where both deceased still lay. The disorders of the room had, as usual, been suffered to exist. I saw nothing beyond what had been stated in La Gazette. Dupin scrutinized everything. We went into the other rooms and into the yard. The examination occupied us until dark, when we took our departure. On our way home, I was surprised that Dupin stepped in for a moment at the office of one of the local papers. As he seemed so absorbed in thought, I did not question him at the time. The next day, though, in our chambers, he alluded to the subject that had sent us forth.
Tell me, mon ami, did you observe anything peculiar at the scene of the atrocity?
No, nothing peculiar. Nothing more, at least, than what had already been stated in the paper.
La Gazette has not entered, I fear, into the true horror of the thing. But, set aside the idle suppositions of the press, it appears to me that this mystery is considered insoluble for the very reason why it should be easy of solution.
What do you mean?
I mean for the outre character of its features. The police are confounded by the seeming absence of motive, not for the murder itself, but for the atrocity of the murder. They are puzzled, too, by the seeming impossibility of reconciling the voices heard in contention with the fact that no one was discovered upon the stairs, and they can find no means of egress that may have escaped the notice of the party ascending. The wild disorder of the room, the corpse thrust with its head downward up the chimney, the frightful mutilation of the body of the old lady, all of these considerations have paralyzed the powers of the police and put into question their boasted acumen. You see, they've fallen into the very gross but common error of confusing the unusual with the abstruse. However, it is in these very deviations from the plane of the ordinary that reason will feel its way in its search for the truth.
Oh, you have a theory, then?
In investigations such as these, it should not be asked so much as what has occurred as what has occurred that has never occurred before. In fact, the facility at which I shall arrive, or have arrived, at a solution to this mystery is in direct ratio with its apparent insolubility in the eyes of the police.
You, you have arrived at a solution?
Of course. I am even now awaiting a person who, although perhaps not the perpetrator of these horrible butcheries, must have been in some measure implicated in their perpetration. Of the worst measures of the crimes committed, it is probable that he is innocent. I look for this man here, in this very room, any moment. It is true he may not arrive, but the probability is that he will. And should he arrive, we must detain him. Here are pistols. We are both versed in their usage. Have care, mon ami. The powder is prime.
Dupin, you astonish me. But look here. How have you solved it? Who is this man that we are expecting at any moment? Dupin, for God's sakes, tell me.
Do not distress yourself, mon ami. It is simplicity in itself. One has only to use one's reason, after all. First, let us look at the contentious voices heard by the party ascending the stairs. First, let us rule out the obvious. That they are not the voices of the women is fully obvious. Murder, then, has been committed by some third party, and the voices of this third party were those heard in contention upon the stairs. Let me now advert to what was peculiar about the testimony. Did you observe anything peculiar about it?
Well, the witnesses agreed that the gruff voice was that of a Frenchman. There was much disagreement in regard to the shrill, or as one individual termed it, the harsh voice.
Yes, that was the evidence, but not the peculiarity of the evidence. You have observed much, but understood little. The witnesses, as you remark, were unanimous in their opinion of the gruff voice. It was that of a Frenchman. But in regards to the shrill voice, the peculiarity is not that they disagreed, but that every person who heard it agreed that it was that of a foreigner. The Frenchman supposes that it is the voice of a Spaniard, although he does not speak Spanish. The Dutchman considered it the voice of a Frenchman, but since he spoke through an interpreter, he does not understand French.
The Englishwoman thinks it's the voice of a German, but does not understand German.
Exactly. The Spaniard assured it is that of an Englishman, but has to judge by its intonation, since he does not speak the language. The Italian believes it to be the voice of a Russian, but
does not understand Russian.
Exactly. A second Frenchman differs, moreover, with the first, and is positive that the voice is that of an Italian, but, not being cognizant of the language, has to go by the intonation, as did the Spaniard.
Yes, it is most strange.
How strangely unusual must that voice have been to elicit such a different reaction from all of these people? I now call your attention to 3 points. First, the voice is termed by one witness as harsh rather than shrill. Second, it is represented by 2 others to have been quick and unequal. And third, no words, no sounds resembling words, no syllabification could be identified by any party.
Yes, it is, that is so, yes.
I know not what impressions I may have made upon your own understanding, but I do not hesitate to say that legitimate deductions, even from this portion of the testimony, are in themselves sufficient to engender a suspicion that furthers all progress in the investigation of this mystery. Now, I say legitimate deductions, but in truth I mean to imply that these deductions are the only proper one, and the suspicion arises inevitably from them.
What suspicion? I don't follow.
What suspicions I have, I will not say just yet. Now let us transport ourselves, in our fancy, to the chamber where these atrocities occurred. Tell me, what shall we first seek here?
I would say, how did the murderer escape? I confess I am at a total loss.
How indeed? Needless to say, neither of us believe in preternatural events. Madame and Mademoiselle L'Espanaye were killed not by spirits, but by some material thing, and therefore that material must have escaped materially.
Yes, of course, but for the life of me, I don't see how.
Well, let us examine all possible modes of egress. It is clear that the assassins were in the room where Mademoiselle L'Espanaye was found, or at least in the room adjoining when the party ascended the stairs. It is then only from these two apartments that we need to seek issues. The police have laid bare the floors, the ceilings, and the walls in every direction. No secret issue could have escaped their vigilance, but not trusting to their eyes, I undertook my own investigation.
And?
There were no secret issues.
Of course.
First, consider the doors. Could the murderers have escaped through the doors?
No, by no means. Both doors leading from the rooms into the passage were securely locked, and the keys were inside.
Second, then, let us turn to the chimneys. These, though of normal width, for about 8 to 10 feet above the hearth, would not admit the body of a large cat. Thus, you will agree, mon ami, egress by either of these two means is an impossibility.
Yes, certainly.
Then third, we must examine the windows. Now, no one could have escaped through the windows of the front room, as that overlooks the street and would be viewed by the crowd outside.
Yes, that is true.
The murderers, then, must have passed through the windows of the back room.
Yes, they must. But how? The windows were both securely locked from the inside.
There are two windows in the back chamber. One is wholly unobstructed by furniture and is completely visible. The lower portion of the other is hidden from view by the head of an unwieldy bedstead that is thrust up close against it. The unobstructed window was found securely fastened from within. It resisted the utmost force of anyone attempting to raise it. How was it fastened? A large gimlet hole had been pierced through the side and a nail driven in to secure it. Upon examining the other window, a similar nail was found similarly fitted in it, and a vigorous attempt to raise that sash failed as well.
Yes, the police determined this.
That is where the police made their first mistake. They were entirely satisfied that egress could not have been made through these windows, and so it was thought unnecessary to withdraw the nails and endeavor to raise the sash. My own examination was somewhat more particular. You see, mon ami, reason does not allow us to reject a conclusion simply because of its seeming impossibility. I proceeded to think thus. A posteriori, the murderers did escape from one of these windows.
Oh, but hang it, Dupin, both windows were locked from the inside.
Oh, you are right. They could not have refastened the sashes from the inside, as they were found fastened. This is the consideration which put to a stop, by its obviousness, to the scrutiny of the police in this matter. Yet the sashes were fastened. They must, therefore, have the ability to fasten themselves.
Oh, how can that be? Surely not.
There is no escape from this conclusion. I stepped to the unobstructed casement, withdrew the nail with some difficulty, and attempted to raise the sash. It resisted all of my efforts, as I had anticipated. A hidden spring, I thought, therefore must exist. I felt around the back end of it for a bit, and located the hidden spring, pressing it, and I was able to upraise the sash.
A hidden spring? Then that's the answer.
Not so fast, mon ami. I replaced the nail and regarded it attentively. A person passing out through this window might have reclosed it and the spring would have caught, but the nail would not have been replaced.
Of course, the nail would have had to be replaced since it was so found.
The conclusion was plain and again narrowed the field of my investigation.
The assassins must have escaped through the other window.
Supposing then that the springs upon the sashes to be the same, as was probable, there must be a difference between the nails. Getting upon the sacking of the bedstead, I looked out over the headboard minutely at that second casement. Pressing my hand down behind the board, I readily discovered and pressed the spring, which was, as I had supposed, identical in character with its neighbor. I now looked at the nail. It was as stout as the other, and apparently fitted in the same manner, driven in nearly to the head.
That is puzzling.
You will say that I was puzzled, but then you have misunderstood the nature of the inductions. There is no flaw in any link of my chain of reasoning. I had traced the secret to its ultimate result, and that result was the nail. There must be something wrong, I said, about the nail. I touched it, and the head, with about 1/4 of an inch of the shank, came off in my fingertips. The rest of the shank was in the gimlet hole where it had been broken off. The fracture was an old one. I now carefully replaced the head portion in the indentation whence I had taken it, and the resemblance to a perfect nail was complete. The fissure was completely invisible. Pressing the spring, I raised the sash for a few inches, and the head went up with it. I lowered the sash, and voila! The nail once again had the appearance of being whole.
So the nail is the key to the whole riddle. Oh, Dupont, that is amazing. The police completely missed that.
The riddle so far was thus unriddled. The assassin had escaped through the window which looked upon the bed. Dropping of its own accord upon the exit, the window had become fastened by the spring, and the nail dropped back into place. It was the operation of the spring, not the nail, which had been mistaken by the police, and further inquiry was thus considered unnecessary.
Well, so far, so good. I'm with you. But then how did he descend from the fourth story?
Yes, that is the next question. The mode of descent. Upon this point, I had been satisfied with my walk with you around the building. You recall, do you not, that about 5.5 feet from the casement in question there runs a lightning rod?
A lightning rod? Yes, I do vaguely recall seeing something of that sort. But what does that signify? No one could have reached the window from this rod, to say nothing of entering it.
You think not. But you, like the police, did not closely observe the shutters, as I did.
Shutters? Why, they were ordinary shutters, surely.
No, not at all. Why, these are in fact, a peculiar kind called by Parisian carpenters ferrades. A kind rarely employed in the present day, but often seen in older buildings, such as those in Lyon and Bordeaux. This was an old house, you recall.
Yes, very interesting, but what of it?
Such shutters are in the form of an ordinary door, a single, not a folding door, except that the lower half is latticed or worked in an open trellis, thus affording an excellent hold for the hands. In the present instance, these shutters are fully 3.5 feet broad. When we saw them at the rear of the house, they were both about half open. That is to say, they stood off at right angles from the wall. It is probable that the police, as well as myself, examined the back of the tenement, but if they did not perceive the breadth itself, or at all events failed to take it into due consideration, and doing so, they missed a very important clue.
How so?
It was clear to me that if the shutters belonging to the window at the head of the bed would, if swung fully from the wall, come within 2 feet of that lightning rod. It was also evidenced by the exertion of an unusual degree of activity and courage. An entrance to the window from the rod might thus have been effected. If we suppose that the shutter was open to its full extent, the robber may have taken a firm grasp upon the trellis work. Letting go of his hold upon the rod, he would swing himself toward the building and, should the window be open, have access to the room.
Yes, I see. That is possible.
Now, I wish you to bear specifically in mind that I have spoken of a very unusual degree of agility and activity as requisite to success in so hazardous and difficult a feat. It is my design to show you first that the thing might have been accomplished, but second and chiefly to impress upon your understanding the very extraordinary, almost preternatural character of the agility required to accomplish it. Now, place in juxtaposition that very unusual activity of which I have just spoken, with that very shrill and unequal voice, about whose nationality no two persons could be found to agree, and in whose utterance no syllabification could be detected.
I think I begin to see what you're driving at. You don't mean that...
You will see that I have shifted my method of questioning from a mode of egress to that of ingress. It is my design to convey the idea that both were affected in exactly the same manner at the same point. Let us now revert to the interior of the room. The drawers of the bureau, it is said, had been rifled, though many articles of apparel still remained within them. The conclusion here is absurd. It is a mere guess, nothing more, and a silly one at that. How are we to know that the articles found in the drawers were not all that were originally contained? Madame and Mademoiselle L'Espanaye led an exceedingly retired life. They saw no company, seldom went out, and had little use for numerous changes of habiliment. Those found were at least as of good quality as likely any that they owned. If the thief had taken any, why not take the best? Why not take them all? In a word, Why would the thief take a few articles of clothing and leave 4,000 francs in gold in bags upon the floor? Nearly the whole sum mentioned by Monsieur Mignon, the banker, was discovered still there.
Yes, the gold. I forgot about the gold. If the thief did not take the gold after all, what was the motive for these dreadful murders?
Oh, discard from your thoughts the blundering idea of motive, so engendered in the brains of the police by that portion of the evidence which speaks of money delivered at the door of the house. Coincidences 10 times as unlikely as this happen to all of us every hour of our lives without notice or mention. Coincidences in general are stumbling blocks in the way of that class of thinkers who have been educated to know nothing of the theory of probabilities. In the present instance, had the gold been gone, then its delivery 3 days before would have formed something more than coincidence. It would have been corroborative of this idea of motive. But under the real circumstances of the case, if we are to suppose gold the motive of this outrage, we must also imagine the perpetrator to be so vacillating an idiot as to have abandoned the gold and his motive altogether.
So if there is no motive, where does that leave us? I see no reason for these dastardly murders.
Keeping now steadily in mind those points to which I have drawn to your attention, that peculiar voice, that unusual agility, and the startling absence of a motive in a murder so singularly atrocious as this, let us glance at the butchery itself. Here is a woman, strangled to death by manual strength, and thrust up a chimney. Ordinary assassins employ no such means of murder as this. Least of all do they thus dispose of the murdered.
There is certainly something exceedingly outre, something altogether irreconcilable with our common notions of human action. I mean, even if we suppose the actors to be the most depraved of men.
Think, too, of the prodigious strength it would have required to have thrust the body of the young lady up the chimney thus, so that it took the combined efforts of several men to drag it back down again. Turn now to the other indications of an employment of a vigor most marvelous. On the hearth were thick tresses, very thick tresses, of gray human hair. These had been torn out by the roots. You saw the locks in question as well as myself.
Yes, it was a hideous sight. The roots were clotted with fragments of flesh from the scalp.
A sure token of the prodigious power which had been exerted to uproot perhaps 1,000,000 hairs at a time.
Oh, certainly something of vast, even superhuman strength.
The throat of the old lady was not merely cut, but the head was absolutely severed from the body. The instrument was a mere razor. I wish you all to look at the brutal ferocity of these deeds. Of the bruises upon the body of Madame L'Espanaye I do not speak. Monsieur Dumas has pronounced that they were inflicted by some obtuse instrument, and in this the gentleman is very correct. The obtuse instrument is clearly the stone pavement of the yard upon which the victim had fallen from the window.
Yes, I understood that. The police completely missed that.
The idea, however simple it may seem, escaped the police for the same reason that the breadth of the shutters escaped them, because by the affair of the nails their perceptions had been hermetically sealed against the possibility of the windows having ever been opened at all. If now, in addition to all of these things, you have properly reflected on the odd disorder of the room, we have gone so far to combine the ideas of an agility astounding, a strength superhuman, a ferocity brutal, a butchery without motive, a grotesquerie in horror absolutely alien from humanity, and a voice foreign in tone to the ears of men of many nations and devoid of all distinct or intelligible syllabification. What result has ensued? What impressions have I made upon you?
A madman has done this deed. Some raving maniac escaped from a local maison de santé.
In some respects, your idea is not irrelevant, but the voices of a madman, even in their wildest paroxysms, are never found to tally with that particular voice heard upon the stairs. Madmen are of some nation, and their language, however incoherent in words, always has the coherence of syllabification. Moreover, the hair of a madman is not such as I now hold in my hand. I disentangled this clump from the clutches of Madame L'Espanaye. Another little thing the police missed. Tell me what you think of it.
Dupin, this hair is most unusual. This is no human hair.
I have not asserted that it is. But before we decide that point, I wish you to glance at this sketch. I have traced upon this paper a facsimile drawing of what has been described in one portion of the testimony as dark bruises and deep indentations upon the throat of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye. In another, by Monsieur Dumas, as a series of livid spots, evidently the impression of fingers. I have expanded those proportionally to a full hand. Now, attempt now to place your fingers at the same time in the respective impressions as you see them.
I cannot. This is the mark of no human hand.
Read now this passage from Cuvier.
Oh, I'm damned.
As you see, it is a minute, anatomical, and generally descriptive account of the large fulvous orangutan of the East Indian Islands. The gigantic stature, the prodigious strength and activity, the wild ferocity and imitative propensities of this mammalia are well known to all.
The description of the digits is in exact accordance with this drawing, and I see no animal but other than an orangutan of the species that you mentioned. It could have impressed the indentations as you've traced them. The tuft of tawny hair, too, is identical to the character of the beast in Cuvier. But I cannot possibly comprehend the particulars of this frightful mystery. Besides, there were two voices heard in contention, and one of them was definitely, unquestionably, that of a Frenchman.
True. And you will remember an expression attributed almost unanimously to this voice, the expression, mon Dieu. This, under the circumstances, has been justly characterized by one of the witnesses as an expression of remonstrance or expostulation. Upon these two words, therefore, I have built my hopes of a full solution to this riddle.
A Frenchman was cognizant of the murder.
It is possible. Indeed, it is far more than probable that he was innocent of all participation in the bloody transactions which took place. The orangutan may have escaped from him. He may have traced it back to the chamber, but under the agitating circumstances which ensued, he could never have recaptured it. It is still at large. I will not pursue these guesses, for I have no right to call them more.
But then, what are we to do?
If the Frenchman in question is, indeed, as I suppose, innocent of this atrocity, then this advertisement which I left last night upon our return home at the office of Le Monde, a paper devoted to the shipping interest and much sought by sailors, will bring him to our residence.
Caught in the Bois de Boulogne, early yesterday morning, a very large tawny orangutan of the Bornese species. The owner, who is ascertained to be a sailor belonging to a Maltese vessel, may have the animal again upon identifying it satisfactorily and paying a few charges arising from its capture and keeping. Call it number 17, Rue de Dubois, Faubourg Saint-Germain, at 3 p.m. How is it possible that you could know that the man is a sailor and belonging to a Maltese vessel?
Well, I do not know it. I am not sure of it. Here, however, is a piece of ribbon which, from its form and its greasy appearance, has evidently been used in tying the hair in one of those long queues of which the sailors are so fond. Moreover, this knot is unique to the Maltese. I picked up the ribbon at the foot of the lightning rod. It could not have belonged to either of the deceased. The police, of course, did not notice it.
But will he reply to the advertisement? Even if he is innocent of the murder, he may be fearful that he'll be arrested and...
Well, he will naturally hesitate, but he will reason thus. I am innocent. I am poor. My orangutan is of great value, a fortune of itself. Why should I lose it? Here it is within my grasp. It was found in the Bois de Boulogne, far away from the scene of the butchery. How can it ever be suspected that my beast did the deed? Should they even trace the animal, it would be impossible to prove me involved in the murder. Above all, I am known. The advertiser designates me as the possessor of the beast. I am not sure to what limit his knowledge may extend. Should I avoid claiming a beast of such great value, which it is known that I possess, I will render the animal liable to suspicion. It is not my policy to attract attention either to myself or to the beast. I will answer the advertisement, get the orangutan, and keep it close until this matter has blown over. Be ready with your pistols, but neither show it nor use it until I get the word. Come in.
Bonjour.
Sit down, my friend. I suppose you must have called about the orangutan. I must say, I do envy you. A remarkably fine and no doubt very valuable animal. How old do you suppose him to be?
Oh, I have no way of telling. Perhaps 4 or 5 years old.
Interesting.
Do you have him here?
Oh, no, we have no conveniences for holding him here. He is in a livery stable down on the Rue du Bourg. You can get him in the morning. Of course, you are prepared to identify your property.
To be sure I am, sir.
Well, good. I shall be very sorry to part with him.
I don't mean that you should be at all this trouble for nothing, sir. Couldn't expect it. I'm quite willing to pay a price for your trouble. Within reason, of course.
Well, that is very fair indeed. To be sure, let me see. What do I want? Ah. You will tell me all you know about the murders in the Rue Morgue. Oh, my friend, please, sit. You are alarming yourself unnecessarily. Please, we mean you no harm. I swear upon my honor as a gentleman and that of a Frenchman. I know that you are not involved in the murders. However, it will not do to say that you are not in some way implicated in them. From what I have already said, you know that I have some measure of information in this matter. Now, the thing stands thus. You have done nothing which you could have avoided. Nothing which certainly renders you culpable. You are not even guilty of robbery, where you may have robbed with impunity. You have nothing to conceal. On the other hand, you are bound by every principle of honor to reveal what you know. An innocent man now stands in prison for a crime of which you may point out the perpetrator.
So help me God, I'll tell you all I know of this affair. But you will not believe the half of it. But still, I am an innocent man, and will make a clean breast of it, even if I die for it. I lately made a voyage to the Indian archipelago. A party of us landed in Borneo, and went into the interior for an excursion of pleasure. Myself and a mate captured the orangutan. My mate died some time later. And so, after great trouble on the voyage home, I got it lodged safely at my own residence in Paris to avoid attracting any unpleasant curiosity of my neighbors. I kept it carefully secluded until such time as I should recover from a wound in the foot received from a splinter on board ship. I hoped to sell it, you see. Well, I was coming home from a frolic with my mates in the morning of them murders, and I found the beast in my own bedroom. He had broken into it from a closet where I thought I had got him securely confined. He had a razor in hand and was fully lathered, sitting there before my looking glass attempting to shave, probably because he had watched me looking through the keyhole of the closet. I was terrified at the sight of so dangerous a weapon in the possession of an animal so ferocious, and who was so well able to use it, and I didn't know what to do. But I had been used to quieting the beast, even in its fiercest moods, by the use of a whip. And so I grabbed the whip, and at the sight of it, the orangutan sprang through the door of the chamber, down the stairs, and thence through a window into the street. I followed in despair, the ape, razor still in hand, occasionally stopping to look back and make a gesture at me as if daring me to catch him. I chased him for a long time, and at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, we passed down an alley in the rear of the Rue Morgue, and there was a light gleaming from an open window in the 4th story of a house.
The house of Madame L'Espanaye.
Yes, the beast rushed into the building, clambered up the lightning rod, grasped the shutter, and swung himself inside. The whole thing happened in a minute. I thought I could recapture the brute, then since it could scarcely escape from the trap it had got caught in, except by the rod where I could grab it when it came down, but then I didn't know what it might do in the house. So I followed his lead, went up the lightning rod.
You went up the lightning rod, but how could you do that?
Oh, it is not too difficult for a sailor. But then I got as high as the window, which lay far to his left, and I was stopped. The most I could do was reach over so as to get a glimpse of the room, and I nearly fell from horror from what I saw. Then there started these hideous shrieks. The two ladies were looking at some papers in an iron chest in the middle of the room. They must have been sitting with their backs toward the window. As I watched, the beast seized one of them by the hair and was waving the razor about her face like a barber. The other one had fainted and lay on the floor. The screams and struggles of the old lady maddened the beast, and with one sweep of its arm, it nearly severed her head from her body. The sight of the blood inflamed it further. Gnashing its teeth and flashing fires from its eyes, it flew upon the body of the girl and sank its talon into her throat until she expired. It was just at this moment that the beast looked over toward where I was watching in horror, and its fury instantly changed to fear, no doubt remembering the dreaded whip. It ran about the chamber furiously, throwing down and breaking the furniture, dragging the bed from the bedstead. Finally, it seized the corpse of the daughter and thrust it up the chimney, then grabbed the old lady and hurled her through the window. As the ape came toward the window, I shrank to the rod and glided down it and hurried home. I was afraid of the butchery and didn't think twice about the orangutan.
So the voices heard upon the staircase were yours, plus the jabberings of the fiendish brute.
The orangutan must have escaped from the chamber by the rod just before the break of the door. It must have closed the window as it passed through it.
That's just what it did. And now I better see about getting the beast in hand. I'll be on my way.
Right. Well, you'll be able to apprehend him easily, I dare say.
And that is what happened. And our sailor friend reaped a very large sum for it at the Jardin des Plantes. And when Dupin related the circumstances to the prefect of police, Le Bon was instantly released, and not without some acerbic comments from that functionary.
Well, it's most extraordinary, I must say. Though I have no doubt that we would have, in time, ascertained the facts without the distraction occasioned by the superfluous interference of some citizens who would be better off leaving us to do our jobs and minding their own business.
Let him talk, let him discourse, if it pleases him. I am satisfied with defeating him in his own castle. Nevertheless, that he failed in the solution to this mystery is not the wonderment that he would put it. You see, our friend the prefect is somewhat too cunning to be profound. His wisdom has no stamen. It is all head and no body. He is a good creature, after all, though. I do like him very much. In particular, I do like his one master stroke of cant, for which he has a reputation of ingenuity.
And that is?
I mean the way he has of denying what is and explaining what is not.